Starting recording. Okay, so I think what we're going to do now, I'm going to share the document so you can all see it. And then we're going to go through section by section, but I think it might help if I just start by giving a little bit of an overview of what we're trying to do here. Actually, before I continue, I've got a few colleagues in the room here. If you see hands up and it seems like I haven't noticed it, Andy, Dawn, or Karen, do take yourself off the microphone and let me know, because it might be that I don't notice it as I'm speaking. So let me know if someone wants to come in. So I'm just going to start by telling you what we're trying to do with the ecology strategy, and then we're going to start moving through the different sections. So I think the first and perhaps the most important thing to bear in mind is that this is the Highland Council's ecology strategy rather than a Highland-wide ecology strategy. So I think you're going to notice that the strategy is really focused on the Highland Council's own estate and focusing on our own departments, our own processes, and what we can directly do to impact the environment and communities within the Highlands. So you might notice a few gaps, things that we have a bit less of an impact on, and that's because we're really trying to focus this document on those things that are within our control. So that's the first thing really to bear in mind. We're going to move down now. This is the title page of the ecology strategy. I think we'll only very briefly look at the foreword, because the foreword really is giving a summary of everything else that you're going to be seeing later on. So what we're trying to do in the foreword is really setting the scene for people who are coming to this document without knowing too much about it before. It says a little bit about why biodiversity is important. It tells you a little bit about the Highlands, and it highlights a few key facts, statistics, a few species from the Highland region. And so that's really the purpose of the foreword, is to give people an idea, an overall idea about what this document is and what we're trying to do with it. It also sets out some links between the ecological emergency and climate change. So some of you may be aware that we've also got this net zero strategy. So these are not the same document, but they definitely link up quite frequently, and we've got references to the net zero strategy here. If any of you are interested, I can send you the net zero strategy later, so do send me an email. It's also available online for you to go and find. Okay, again, the executive summary, this is for people who maybe don't have the time to go through the whole document. The document is 40 pages long, and so it may be that for some people they just want to come and have a quick look, and so that's what this section really is, the executive summary. So the introduction gives a bit of background. So how did we get to this point where we're creating an ecology strategy? Why is it coming at this time? It gives some of the global and national and European influences that's sort of brought us to this point, referencing sort of key moments such as COP26 and then some of the biodiversity conferences as well, which has sort of raised the ecological crisis up the agenda. I think for quite a long time we've been talking about net zero, we've been talking about climate change and the importance of lowering our emissions, and I think sometimes that tends to eclipse some of the biodiversity issues, some of the challenges that our local plants and animals and the whole ecosystems are facing. So there's a bit of background there, just telling you how we got to this point. And then here, number 2, the description of the action plan, it really just describes the structure of this document. So each section of the ecology strategy sets out some of the main projects that the Highland Council is or will soon be carrying out, which have an impact on biodiversity. It gives an idea of some of the policies and other strategies which play into these same themes. But then there's also an action plan at the end of each section, which details some really specific actions which we are going to carry out. So there you'll see the scale of the action, the target of the action, and the timeline as well. So I think it's a really good way of sort of ticking off these achievements as we try and move towards a greener way of running the council. So the sections that we're going to be looking at today, we've grouped these actions, this action plan, into 5 different themes: leadership, space for nature, pollution, communication, training and education. That's one thing. And then looking at data management as well. That's the 5th. So it might be a good time to talk about it now, but it might actually make more sense to ask this question at the end, after we've gone through the whole strategy. What do you think about these 5 themes? Are we covering everything that needs to be covered? Do we need more or fewer themes? Should we be more focused on just a few of those? So that's something maybe to bear in mind. And when we get to the end and we're doing a bit of a summary, I think that might be quite a good question. I do have that noted down, so I'll maybe come back to that at the end. But these are the different sections that we're going to go through. This page here shows you how this strategy is influenced by and also connects to other strategies at local, national, and international levels. I think this can be quite useful for those people who want to get on a slightly deeper dive into some of these themes. They can have a look around and see what else is going on at these different levels, and they can think about how that interacts with the ecology strategy. So now we're going to move into our first theme. Now, it would take up the whole 2 hours if I was just to sort of read through the entire document and then ask for feedback. So instead, what I'm going to do is try and give a bit more of an overview of what we're doing in each section. And then we're going to go more slowly through the action plan for each section. So if it does seem as though I'm skimming through this a little bit, we are going to slow down when we get to the action plan, to the table at the end of this particular section. So we chose leadership because we wanted to focus on the role that the council plays in coordinating on various projects, on strategies, on sending the kind of messages which help to support healthy biodiversity and healthy ecosystems, and some of the partnership work that we have with other public bodies, private sector, communities, and small businesses of all sizes. And I think this is a good section to do that. This is also the section where we talk about the relationship between the Highland Council and national government, so in Holyrood and also in Westminster, and the lobbying role that the Highland Council can play to advocate for certain things which are important to ecology in the Highlands. You'll also notice here for the first time a green box. So this green box here, Highland Wildflower Meadow Mosaic Initiative, the green boxes throughout this document are highlighting specific projects which the council is either currently involved in, projects which have recently come to a close, or something that we're soon to be working on. I think they highlight some of the work that the council does. It shows the breadth of these different operations that the council is carrying out. And so here's 2 more of them here, the Flow Country World Heritage Site project. And here's an update that needs to happen straight away, because we wrote this before the Flow Country became the world's first peatland World Heritage Site. So there's already quite an exciting update for this page, because this was written before we knew whether or not we would get that accolade. And then the Green Finance Initiative really dovetails with the World Heritage Site project. The Green Finance Initiative really functions to attract private investment into restoring habitat in the far north of the Highlands. For the most part, that will be peatlands, but there's also some funding there for riparian woodland and for other projects as well. So I think these are 2 really strong projects and initiatives to start us off with. And I think it is good for the leadership section, because it really shows the international power of what we have here in the Highlands. So we've got the world's first peatland World Heritage Site, as I mentioned, and a Green Finance Initiative. So quite a novel, quite a new idea about how we actually fund some of the restoration work that we're going to be doing. Some really nice photography here. This is another picture of the Flow Country. So now we get to our first action plan. So here we have a table that's spread across a couple of pages in burgundy or whatever, but maroon, whatever this color is. And this is the bit that we're going to go through a little bit more slowly. This is where we really want to get some of your feedback. So this is a list of actions which are currently in the ecology strategy. Remember, this is out for consultation. This is still considered to be in draft form. We are really looking for your feedback. Are these good actions to have? Can you think of improvements? Are there any here which shouldn't be here? And so this is where I really want to turn the session over to you and to hear what you think. So we're going to go through these from the top. I've opened Teams up a little bit more so I can see if hands are going up. And we're going to go through the different actions one by one. And if you have a comment or if you have a question, you can press the hand symbol with the word raise written underneath. And then I'll invite you to unmute yourself, give your comment or your question, and then I'll do my best to answer. But as I mentioned, I do have a few colleagues in the meeting as well who I can tag in if I'm not quite sure what the answer is. So we're going to start with the first of the actions here. So embed, there we go. Embed biodiversity and biodiversity enhancement within our own capital programs and development projects. So this is quite a broad one, very, very sort of inside baseball, you might say, is that this is a council operation. Are there any particular comments or questions about this first action? Okay, we'll move on to the second one then. Develop forward-thinking, ambitious policy and guidance to ensure development in Highland safeguards, enhances and celebrates our unique natural heritage.
Sorry, Joe, there's one just from Jackie about the last question, I think.
Oh, I am sorry, Jackie. Jackie, please.
Hi. No problem. It applies to both, so all good. So I think that from my perspective, they sound good. But I guess not being within the Highland Council, I probably sit there going like, what does that actually mean? And what's the actual action? They just seem quite like either vague, but that's either because I'm not part of the Highland Council, so I don't know the specifics of what it means, or maybe there's just a question of like really getting to the grips of like practically what would that mean on the ground in a year's time, what the outcome of it, thinking about it can be clearer in a way, and have maybe like outcomes attached to that. That was my only thinking, and it applies to quite a lot of the actions, I think. But again, I'm not sure whether that's just because if you're in the Highland Council or you're an ecologist, you get it, and if you're not like me, you don't get it, or whether they could just be written in a slightly clearer, more direct way.
Yeah, thanks very much for that comment. And you know, they are quite broad, and I think if you are reading this from an outside perspective, I completely see that it seems that way, and we want this document to be something that the public is engaging with and that is easily understandable to the public. So really, this is about the culture of the Highland Council, these particular actions. But I completely take your point that it's not particularly specific, and that from an outside perspective, it would not be easy to know what this practically means. And I think that's something that we can have a look at actually, where we could maybe include some examples in these actions to show what that would practically mean on the ground. So I think that's a really good point. So thanks very much for that, Jackie.
No problem. Thanks.
So I can see the hands now, so I can go to Cecilia, please.
Hello, I'm from Glengarry Community Council. As you perhaps know, we're on the very edge of the rough bounds. And as you probably don't know, we already have one massive pump storage hydro scheme underway beside Loch Lochy. There is another one being planned. There is also a very large wind farm being planned. We already have a wind farm here. We know when I'm speaking for you, I'm not speaking necessarily from my own opinions, but just to tell you that within the Glengarry Community Council, there is definitely a split of views. We feel that Highland Council is not doing enough to acknowledge the importance of the existing beautiful and wild landscape. And there are people on the Community Council who are very concerned indeed that because of the net zero push, the beauty and the wildness that is here already will be jeopardized. Does your Action 1, 2 have anything to say to people like the people in our community who are bothered about this sort of thing.
Thanks very much for your comment, Cecilia. And I do recognise that there's a concern around renewable energy. I saw it was earlier today that I think the National Grid was talking about significant increases in offshore development, in particular in the North Sea, and I think that's where a lot of the new development is going to come from. And while renewable energy is not something that is specifically addressed in this document, you will find reference to it, but more so in the net zero strategy. But we do have in the room Karen, who works a bit more on the planning side, and I just wondered, Karen, if you could maybe say a couple of things about the Highland Council and permissions for renewable energy onshore. Well, I'm not hearing Kat. Oh, sorry, go on. Sorry,
it's been a bit slow there. Yeah, so I work in the planning department mostly for the ecology aspect. So NPF 4 came in last year, and that has a lot more enhancement for looking at the protection of biodiversity and making sure that every development has enhancement measures. That means that the development site is left in a better state for biodiversity than it previously was. And we've also created biodiversity enhancement planning guidance for all our colleagues in the planning department and for all applicants on how we want to see this delivered. So we have actually set up quite a lot of resources to ensure that we are getting more biodiversity enhancement and the biodiversity protection is in place. Hope that answers your question.
Thanks very much, Karen. And I wonder, Cecilia, if you think it might be helpful to have references to things such as NPF 4 a little bit earlier on in the document. We do mention it later on in this document, but perhaps that's something people might want to see a little bit sooner.
Thank you. Yes, I think it would have been very helpful. And I think, in fact, there's a lot more to say about this. I don't want to take up any more time now, but I'd be very grateful if Karen, I'm sorry I haven't got her surname, could produce a written statement that I can then take back to the people in my community who are very, very concerned that however much peat is restored, however much, well, some people are being very sarcastic about newts, however much newts are looked after, nevertheless, the general pharaonic, huge nature of these projects is going to be looked at onshore, I mean, is going to be looked at very, very carefully because of the vast effect that it will have on the landscape. I think there is a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety. And I would have to say, and I'm reporting this for other people, not necessarily for myself, a lot of anger as well. And you're losing people's goodwill over this sort of project.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Cecilia. And it's so Karen Cooper, and I'll talk to Karen later, and we can make sure that we do send you an email later, Cecilia. So we've got your contact details, so we'll be in touch, Cecilia. Can I now go to Gillian, please?
Hiya. Thank you. I just wanted to concur what Jackie said, that it's nice that it's succinct, but it doesn't really mean anything to a lay person reading it. And I think some examples would be a great idea.
Yes, I think we could put a couple more examples in here. I think we've maybe started with two of the vaguest actions in the entire document, which perhaps doesn't particularly help. So I think later on you do see some more specific detail, but I do take your point looking at them. I think they would be strengthened by having a couple of examples as to what that means in practice. So thanks very much for that, Gillian. Could we go to sorry, go on.
It's probably not engaging the reader early on.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe.
Yes, I take your point. That's yeah, thanks, Gillian. Could we go to Graham Fraser next, please?
Yeah, hello. I'm based in the national park area, And what I see in the introduction there is no mention of liaison with the Park Authority over their plan and how it impacts the Highland Council area that is within the Park Authority, because I would have thought you want a degree of joined up thinking between the two of you, and we get to 1.1, 1.2, and as far as I can see, no mention of the Park Authority and its plans in the document.
Yes, so the Highland Council does work really closely with the Park Authority, and there's definitely mention of it in this document. However, perhaps it could be highlighted more clearly a little bit earlier on, because it is a really significant partner. I would have hoped it was in that list of documents, the page before, which shows how this document links with other strategies. You're shaking your head, so it's not, so it can be, because I think it definitely is a relevant document. So thanks very much for that. We're going to go to Jenny Munro now, and then we're going to move on to the next few actions, just to make sure that we've got enough time for some of the other sections. So hiya, Jenny.
Thank you. I'm sorry if this is a stupid question and I should know the answer. But does the ambition for biodiversity and protection of the environments, does it include the marine environment and our coastal regions? I'm from Glenelg and Arnisdale Community Council, and I'm sure people are aware of the concern about from the Arnisdale population about the open pen fish farms and the impact on biodiversity and the marine environment, and we're seeing it firsthand.
So that's a really good question, Jenny, and it's actually one of the things we've spoken about the most since writing this draft document, how little the marine environment is spoken about within the document. And it does reflect that the Highland Council, the estate that we own and the impact that we have is largely on land. However, of course, everything is interconnected, and there are things that we can do which do affect the marine environment. We talk a bit later about things like single-use plastics, and so those are the things which can end up in the marine environment. We also highlight some of the projects that we've worked on, such as Climate Action Coastlines, which is investigating nature-based solutions to things like coastal flooding and erosion, which does affect the marine environment. We're also working on restoration projects with St Andrews and some other universities for salt marsh areas. So there are things that we do which affect the marine environment, but you'll notice through this document that the vast majority of what we're focusing on is on the land. It is terrestrial. But it's a really good point, Jenny, and it's a gap that we noticed ourselves when we were looking through the document, that there maybe wasn't as much as we had been expecting on the marine environment. Russell Leaper.
Thanks. Just on the same theme of the marine environment, in section 1 under partnerships, which we'll get to in a minute, but I thought I'd raise it now just because we're on that topic. There's no mention of marine planning partnerships, and of the 11 marine regions that are covered by marine planning partnerships, there are 3 in the Highland Council area: West Highlands, North Coast and Moray Firth. And I know that other local authorities have kind of taken the initiative to develop these, and I just wondered what Highland Council is planning to do.
So that is something which we perhaps should have a look at. So marine planning partnerships is not something I'm overly familiar with. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any particular comments on that. Andy.
Yeah, yes. Again, as I think with the previous answer Joe gave there, in terms of the emphasis on the marine environment probably does need to be stronger. And I think referencing marine planning partnerships is a really important part of that. We also have the National Marine Plan 2 in production through Scottish Government, and that will be coming out very shortly as well. And so there are going to be areas that we need to link in there too. So I think, I think one of the sort of takeaways that we had before this meeting, but certainly now after this meeting, will be that we need to take a second look at the marine environment and where we do have some influence and some connection with what goes on there. not just with fish farming, but also offshore wind, and then the general sort of policies that surround that as well. Marine protected areas are another area which is predominantly Nature Scott's remit, but again there are interactions there that we have. So yes, I agree, that's something that we do need to probably reference within here.
Thanks very much, Andy, and thanks, Russell. We'll just take your comment, Anne, and then I think we're going to move to the next section. So, Anne. Oh, I can't hear you at the moment, Anne. I'm just going to see if I can unmute you. I can only mute you. Could you unmute yourself, please, Anne? Or I wonder if there's a way that I can do it. I think I've... Ah, there we go. There we go. Hi, Anne.
Yes, I'm from Highland Community Council, and one of the questions that I've been asked to put to you was about the marine environment. We have a coastline which runs from Milton of Redcastle towards North Keswick, and part of it is already designated as a World Heritage Site, mainly because of the seabirds in that area. But it's becoming eroded because of the coastal erosion, and there doesn't seem to be much of an effort, according to the people who live in that area, for the Highland Council to do much to protect the coastline at that point. It was particularly bad this last winter.
So coastal erosion and sea level rise and storm
It's
surges,
sea level
which are...
rise, yes.
Yes. So
There
these
are
are all...
one or two marine biologists who have written to the Community Council highlighting it, but the ordinary residents have become concerned about it.
Yes, I understand.
And it is designated as a World Heritage Site because of the marine birds.
Right, I see. It's one of the biggest challenges that's facing not just the Highland Council, but local authorities all around the coast in the UK, because these issues are being exacerbated by climate change with sea level rise and increased severity and frequency of storm surges as well. And the scale of the challenge is as such that this is not something that the local authority can handle on its own. It's going to take an incredible coordinated response. I don't know if there is yet a minister for the coast in Scotland. I know there was discussion of that coming, but it really will take a national effort in order to address this, and there will be some difficult decisions that have to be made about certain areas which are protected and certain areas which are perhaps not, where we look at coastal change and adaptation rather than putting up the more traditional defences that you see in some other places. So I don't know enough about your specific location to talk to that, but this is something I've worked on a little bit. So Anne, I'm going to make...
It's the Inner Murray Firth.
The Inner Murray Firth, oh right. Anne, can I get in touch with you and arrange a separate conversation about this?
Yeah.
Because this is something that...
I'll put the Community Council email in the chat.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Anne. Okay, we're going to move to the next section now, because we're now a quarter of the way through our allotted time, but we're only on page 1 of Action Plan 1. So I think what I'm going to do, now that you've got the idea of what we're looking for, the kind of engagement we want, the kind of contributions we want, in your own time, if you could take a look through the other actions for leadership, and then you can add your comments to the online consultation, which you will have all received a link to in the invitation to this meeting. I can share that again, or one of us can put it into the chat box, so you can share that online. Or if you'd rather, you can send that to me directly via email. Again, you will have my email address, and I can add that myself. So we're going to move on from the leadership section, and we're going to look at goal 2, which is making space for nature. So this is the largest section of the document, and this really again is focused on the Highland Council's own estate, those things which are directly within our control. So it's the areas that we manage. So there's a brief explanation here of what the council estate is, and it gives an overview of the kinds of areas that we're managing, the varied nature of the different parcels of land that the council owns or is responsible or in part responsible for managing. talks a little bit about grass management and tree planting here. This is all in the introduction. And then going on to the next page here, talking about our approaches to attracting more funding to do nature restoration work, looking to connect important habitats to allow biodiversity to move more naturally between different places. But then this large section at the end, really bringing it back to the communities. So with the Highland Council, we are in the service of the local communities. So while this is the ecology strategy, we are really trying to show how having a healthy environment is serving the local communities. That's something which is really important for quality of life, for things like mental health, and sometimes even for things like food provision. And it's really good for places and spaces for exercise and for work as well. We're highlighting a particular project there, Growing Our Future, and then there's a little bit further on there on nature networks, talking about how these different areas are connected, and there's mention there of NPF4, the planning framework, which Karen mentioned a little bit earlier, and how that's really changing how planning is being done in development, and the kind of biodiversity net gain, the improvements to the land that are going to come from these new regulations and policies. Okay, going to the next page here, highlighting a few key areas. So local nature conservation sites. This is a type of designation which celebrates areas for their important biodiversity or geodiversity. The Highland Council, I believe, is the only local authority area in Scotland which doesn't currently have local nature conservation sites. So one of our targets is to identify areas which would be appropriate for this, and also work with people throughout Highland to nominate places which would be which would meet the criteria for these important spaces, and to start designating a few. We've also got wildflower roundabouts there. You might have noticed some of those as you're driving around the Highlands, and also special verges, which is a similar kind of idea where certain areas are allowed to have more native wildflowers and other plant species, which really helps biodiversity. Okay, going to the next page now, talking a bit more about planning. There'll be more about NPF4 here and how that changes things. I think it's possible that we might go back to Karen for a little bit more about NPF4 when we're going through the action plan to talk about what that actually means for changes on the ground, and how things are likely to be different based on these new planning guidelines. Okay, and then a little bit more. This is still really on planning and development, and sort of giving a background, showing what the Highland Council's responsibilities are, and some of the new developments in the area, including the Green Freeport in Inverness and Cromarty Firth. So this is the section where we do talk about the marine environment a little, and it's something that's come up already. So it is a relatively short section where we're talking about the council's impact when it comes to the marine environment, and maybe the one of the larger impacts is through coastal and marine planning. The council doesn't tend to own a lot of resources which are in the marine environment. Plenty of coastal parcels, but nothing that's really in the marine environment. And then also highlighting a project there, See the Value, which is really sort of celebrating coastal communities and the coastal habitat as well, looking at things like biodiversity, but also sustainability as well. Okay. This section also includes reference to the treatment of invasive non-native species. So you might be familiar with some of these, New Zealand pygmy-weed, Japanese knotweed, some of these other species which are not native to the area, but they're very successful, and they spread very effectively, but they can cause some issues for other local plants, and it's quite an expensive thing to deal with. So this section really talks about how we manage those, and how we try and do that without having a negative impact on the rest of the ecosystem in which these invasive non-native species have spread into. Okay, so we're now going to go through some of the actions in this section, and again, if there are particular actions which stand out to you, we're going to go a bit more slowly through those, But before we do, I can see, Gillian, you've got your hand up again, so please do come on. Hi there, Gillian.
Sorry, it was on the wrong
No,
page.
yeah, no problem, no problem.
No, I was just wondering, I suppose it connects back to the first one, and working in partnership. Just looking at the local nature conservation sites, and I wondered how does the Highland Council work with the Forestry Commission? Because a lot of the site, you know, there's a lot of lovely tree sites in and around Inverness. How can you work with them, or can you not? I mean, is it very up to them what they do with the trees? And also on the invasive species, how do you work with Network Rail? Because it's horrendous hogweed on a lot of the embankments as well.
Yes, so with regards to the local nature conservation sites you mentioned, and working with the Forestry Commission, the main aim of the local nature conservation sites is identifying areas which are really important to local communities. So that's one of the main criteria that they're looking at. So I think it's more likely that we would work with community groups who may well nominate areas of woodland which are important to them. But we do work closely with the various forestry bodies, and so I'm sure that if we were looking at areas of woodland or forest, especially if that's something which they were in part managing or maybe fully managing, then that's something that we would do. And then you mentioned Network Rail as well, and coordination when it comes to working with invasive non-native species. So for this particular strategy, we're just focusing on the land that the council owns and directly manages. I'm not really aware of how we do work with Network Rail. I don't know if anyone else, any of my colleagues are aware of any particular projects where we are working with them, but that might be one that I have to come back to you on, Gillian, because I'm not sure of the answer to that.
Thank you. It seems if we're working hard to get rid of stuff, and then across the fence is a bunch of stuff that we can't access, it seems.
Of course, yes, and the issues with these invasive non-native species is that it really doesn't help if you do a very sort of scattered approach, or if neighbours are managing the same problem, the same issues in different ways, and so coordination is incredibly important for managing invasive non-native species. Absolutely. So I can see a hand up. Oh, sorry, go on.
Can I just add
it's
to that?
Karen. Yes, go, Karen.
Joe, sorry. Just about invasive species. If you do know someone who's got the railway network, then that's actually the responsibility to remove it. It's the landowner's responsibility. So please get in touch with them and let them know about your records. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Karen. Russell.
Yeah, thanks. This is a bit of a general comment, but it sort of struck me most in the coastal and marine planning section, that it kind of comes back to the language being perhaps a little bit vague and difficult to understand. And particularly you kind of say that you'll work in partnership with stakeholders and regulators to understand the value of coastal and marine habitats. And I guess we would expect to see in a strategy more of a commitment to minimizing impacts rather than just understanding habitats. And in the section on changes to aquaculture regulation, for example, anti-predation methods, and where appropriate require suitable assessments. Again, the kind of where appropriate seems to really weaken what you're trying to say, because that's already an obligation to conduct suitable assessments. And I would have expected to see a kind of a commitment to working with aquaculture to minimize their impacts rather than just sort of assessing them.
Yeah, thanks very much for that comment, Russell. And it's not an area where I'm particularly an expert, but I think it does reflect, so maybe the general terms that we're using in the section on marine environment, it does reflect the fact that the Highland Council has rather less of an impact on these environments than we do on the land, and that's where the main focus of this strategy is. However, I absolutely take your point that when we are talking about specific roles that the council have, we do need to be quite specific about what we're doing, and in the strategy it should be quite clear what the goals of the strategy are as they relate to our direct responsibilities. So that's something that we will go and have a look at. And Russell, perhaps I could get in contact with you about this particular section, just because I get the sense that maybe this is an area that you are quite familiar with, and it's an area that I'm not particularly familiar with. And so I think I'd find it quite useful to have a chat, if that's all right with you, if I could maybe set something up.
Sure, that's good with me. I have to confess to being a marine scientist. So.
Well, that would be a very interesting chat then. Okay, thanks very much, Russell. Jackie, you're next, please. Hi, Jackie.
Hello. Just a small one, but I noticed that in the invasive I don't know what it stands for, INNS section, there's no mention of rhododendrons, and I don't know if they qualify for that title, but in the area that we live, they're like the big problem. And that's obviously like the nature reserves take care of it, but there's a lot of estates and like private land that have ponticum everywhere. And it just then like keeps spreading. So just I guess the question as to whether that should be included is purposely not, because it doesn't fall in that category. Where that sits.
I'm going to have to ask for some help on this. Is that a non-native species or an invasive non-native species? Can any of my colleagues help with that, with rhododendron? Does rhododendron count as an invasive non-native species, or is it just non-native species?
Yes, it is invasive.
Right. So in that case, it probably should have been mentioned specifically then. Okay.
Yeah, especially if there's going to be like schemes to remove. I'm in Kinlochhew, so on the west coast, and that's the massive issue. So if there is going to be like investment in schemes to help remove rhododendrons or invasive species, then they should definitely be included from our council's perspective.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Jackie. Can I go to Jenny Munro, please?
Thank you. So I had a couple of questions. Would it be possible to link in with the conversations with Russell? I don't have particular knowledge on the marine environment, but certainly as a community council member, it's something that is very strongly felt by the population of Arnisdale, and I do have people with considerable expertise and concern, and certainly it was something I've been asked to represent and raise. So is there any way I could be linked into that conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that bad? Am I piggybacking on something that I shouldn't be?
No, not at all. And I think perhaps it might be useful to have a separate session where we just talk about the implications for the marine environment and how that should fit into the ecology strategy. So while we're trying to really focus on the Highland Council's direct impacts and on the land and the other areas that the Highland Council is either managing or owning, of course, we do have an impact on the marine environment, and we want to make sure that we're reflecting that as accurately as possible, and we're being suitably ambitious when it comes to our strategy. So I've added you to that as well. So I hope you don't mind, Russell. So Jenny Munro as well. Yes, absolutely.
And thank you very much, both of you. And this is, I may be cheating because this is not an invasive species. It's not an invasive non-native species, but do we have bracken management here? I think I would say crofting is a resource that does promote biodiversity. It allows for hedgerows. It's about managing land in a sympathetic way, but we are being drowned by bracken. Is that in there somewhere?
We don't reference muirburn or other types of bracken management directly, I believe. I'm not sure it's something that the council is particularly involved in. My colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong there. And I think things like muirburn come under the purview of Nature Scott when it comes to regulations around there. So I don't believe that's something that is mentioned within this strategy, Jenny.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah. Can I go to Finlay, please? Or is Finlay, sorry, Leanne. I can only see Finlay. Leanne.
Yeah, hi. Leanne Findlay,
Yes.
Glen Morriston Community Council. My question was about designation of LNCs. What actual practical impact would that have? Because the sort of area that I'm in, we have rivers that have SAC status, some areas of ancient woodlands, and yet they're still being impacted by industrial development. So would these LNCs give us any more protection than what we already have, which doesn't seem to actually do an awful lot?
So a local nature conservation site is actually a lower level than an SAC. An SAC and things such as SSSIs are actually considered to be quite high levels of protection. So I'm sorry to hear that there's still being some negative impacts on the rivers that you're talking about there. So no, a local nature conservation site would not bring in stronger protections than an SAC.
Okay.
Sorry, possibly a disappointing one. Andy, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just to say that with local nature conservation sites, the key reason for designating them are so it highlights their importance, generally speaking, as part of the planning process. So they become a material consideration when we're looking at planning applications that might affect them, and they then benefit from some protection under National Planning Framework 4 and our own policies, our own local development plan policies as well. So it basically means the developer cannot ignore them, and they have to take them on board, and they have to ensure there's appropriate and adequate mitigation and enhancement if their development is going to impact them. So whilst it is a lesser protection than it's not a statutory designation, it's not a designation with a capital D, it's more of a small d, but it does mean that they are then an essential part of the planning process, and they have to be considered, they have to be taken into account, and they have to be assessed.
Thanks very much for that, Andy. And thanks for the question, Leanne. Can we go to Kevin now, please?
Hello.
Hi, Kevin. Yes, we can hear you now.
Right. Yeah. No video because I'm just finished a heat pump training course and I'm in a hotel and the broadband is just about coping. I'm Kevin O'Leary from Lockbroom Community Council. Question on the trees. Forestry Commission in Scotland have been advised or been instructed to start planting more native species. I'm assuming Highland Council will follow the same route and not be planting species from North America or anything, or outside from Scotland. Can you update me on that?
So there is a tree planting strategy which does have a strong emphasis on native woodlands, and a lot of the funding is directing tree planting in that way. More generally, within the Highland Council, but out with as well. I don't know if anyone else who knows a bit more about the tree planting strategy than me wants to add anything to that, because it's not an area I've worked in too much. Andy.
Yeah, so trees planted on our own estate will almost invariably be native. So native species sourced from within Scotland and from within sort of nurseries that have traceability. I suppose one of the exceptions to that is where we're looking at compensatory planting as part of a development, and where that development is removing productive woodland, so commercial conifers, for example. And in those cases, we may require that compensatory planting to be like for like. So we'll be looking where we're losing productive woodland, we would look for the replacement of that productive woodland with more productive woodland. And there are reasons for sort of economic reasons behind that, for local jobs, for ensuring that the forestry sector can still function within the Highlands, as well as ensuring that we don't then have a surfeit of productive woodland for the whole sort of variety of reasons that we have productive woodland in this country, and we're not then having to import wood for paper or for pulp or for heat from abroad. So yes, the answer to your question is yes. Where we are planting new trees on council land, they will be native, but where we are losing productive woodland through development, we will generally speaking require that woodland to be replaced on a like-for-like basis.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, thanks very much, Andy, and thanks for the question, Kevin. So I think we'll go through a couple of actions. We won't have time for all of them. There's quite a lot of actions under Space for Nature, but we'll maybe do the same thing where we have a look at the first couple, take any comments or questions about those. And then if you do have comments or questions about any of the other actions, if you could either add those to the online consultation, or you do have my email, you can send those to me directly and I can add those a bit later on. So I'm just going to go through the first couple. So if we're looking at resourcing, so this is 2.1, increase and enhance the council's access to specialist ecological advice to enable us to meet our obligations under MPF4 and local development plan policies and maximise opportunities. And then 2.2, recruit a council tree or ARB officer to ensure the council's tree resource is managed sustainably and with improved value for biodiversity. So are there any comments on those two there? We've spoken a little bit about MPF4 and planning already, and also a little bit about tree planting. So those two might be able to pass without comment. Kevin, I think your hand's still up from the previous question, but if that's a new hand, do please come on. Oh, that's an old hand. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, in that case, we'll go to the next one then. So that's funding 2.3. Identify and secure external funding for marine and terrestrial biodiversity projects to, for example, enhance biodiversity across the council's estate and deliver joint partnership projects and research more widely. So we've already got some of this ongoing. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the marine environment, a project we're working on with St Andrews University. So we got some funding from SMEF, so that's some national funding within Scotland to do some salt marsh monitoring and restoration around Loch Fleet. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about when we talk about trying to identify funding for this kind of partnership work. But if there's no particular comments on that, we'll maybe go to the next one now. So looking at nature recovery 2.4. Continue to run a nature restoration grant scheme funded through the Nature Restoration Fund to enable the public to deliver land and marine biodiversity projects within their local communities. So there's some of that already ongoing, the Nature Restoration grant scheme. So the action there is to continue looking for that funding and delivering it. And then there's A, B, and C there for different ways that kind of approach is going to be pursued. I've just realised we're coming up to the hour, and we are going to take a break. So I think what we'll do now is we'll take a 5-minute break so we can go make a cup of tea or nip to the loo, and then we'll come back and move on to the next sections. So if we come back shortly after, so it's 3 minutes to 7 now. So if we start 2 or 3 minutes after the hour, so go and make a quick cup of tea, and then we'll crack on afterwards. So thanks very much for the first half, and see you very shortly for the second half. Okay, hi there, everyone. We'll get started again in just a minute or two because I appreciate some people might still be away making a cup of tea. Gillian's asked for my email, so I'm just going to pop it into the chat box. Okay, so you can send me any questions or comments that you have about the document or anything else to the chat box there. And thank you also for those who have added their comments into the chat. That's something that we can see as well, and we can add any of those to the consultation responses. It's an interesting idea, Jackie. So grouping things based on whether they're internal to the council or things which community councils can get more directly involved with that, or maybe communities more widely even. That is something that I think came through particularly in the leadership section, that some of those actions were maybe a bit too internal. So that's something that we can have a look at. Yeah. Okay. So just to recap where we got to, we're currently in the action plan for the Making Space for Nature section. We've already gone through the leadership section as well. And so I think we're now going to move on to the narrative part of the next section. You'll notice there's a lot of actions here for space for nature. So I think we wouldn't have time to go through all of those at the pace at which we're going, but that's something where if you do have the time to go through and add any comments for us, either through the online consultation or by emailing me directly, that's something we'd really appreciate. So the next topic that we're going to talk about is pollution and chemical use. We've referenced this a little bit already because we've spoken a little about invasive non-native species control. I'll just let you in, Jenny. There we go. But I'm just going to take you through the narrative part of this section. Then we're going to go through to the action plan and take any comments and questions. Okay, so this is goal number 3, pollution and chemical use. So we begin here with a little bit of background about what the problem actually is and what it affects. There's a decent amount of mention here about the marine environment, but also freshwater environments as well. And then we bring back to a focus on what it is that the council does and how we can impact pollutions and chemicals in our environment. So looking at the big themes like waste management, that's a big one, light and noise pollution, pesticide, herbicides, and other chemical use. So that has been reduced significantly from where it was in the past. And if you're looking at light and noise pollution, there's been some big changes as well with the introduction of LED lighting. So these are all things that have been considered within the strategy. So this is the only page for the narrative section of pollution and chemical use. And then we go straight into the actions. So we can maybe get through a few more of these. The first one is quite a broad one. So it's to support the net zero strategy actions to reduce waste and stop pollution. So this is something that has a direct impact on pollution and chemicals within the Highland area and of course with the wider area. So if you look at the full scope of emissions which happen with the products that we use and the products that we buy, it's not just contained within the Highlands, it really does go worldwide. Looking at 3.2 there, work with colleagues in the council's lighting team to consider and implement bat, bird and invertebrate friendly lighting and mitigation for the most damaging effects of LED lighting, which have been found to have some negative impacts on those species. 3.3, review the council's use of pesticides as part of the forthcoming integrated weed control strategy and progress the search for alternatives, identifying the benefits and costs of each option. So I know this is a significant issue, looking at weed control and other management of green spaces and whether or not chemicals, pesticides and herbicides should be used in various situations, and the council's also got to balance that with significantly reduced budget for this kind of work. 3.4, continue to work with Chemo International. So this is it's a collection of, I think it's more public bodies and no countries to sort of support work on the marine environment and to try and encourage more public spending and joint ventures with private sector as well to restore areas of the marine environment. And then 3.5, work with the Inverness and Cromarty Green Freeport partners and key agencies to avoid, minimise and mitigate impacts, including noise, on both marine and terrestrial biodiversity, and to meet agreed biodiversity outcomes. So that's the full page for the goals for pollution. So I think we'll now go to any comments or questions about either the narrative section or the list of goals for pollution. Kevin, I think that's still an old hand, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go to Sandra.
Hi, there's nothing on there to say about the rubbish, roadside rubbish and things that are killing the shrews and the wood mice and things. Just wonder if the council has plans to have that under any of these things and how they're going to fit that in. So like waste management, so like bins that are overflowing and all these viewpoints and things that, and yeah, and it's whether you and how you manage that waste and how you manage, maybe do you do a blue bin, for example, rather than just have everything for landfill bins, and what the council plan to do with that.
Yeah, absolutely, and thanks for that, Sandra. And you know, waste management absolutely does affect biodiversity locally, but also globally as well, how we manage that. And I do think that is a bit of a gap here in the goals, and I'm going to make a note of that. So our colleagues in the waste management teams, they have had a look through this document, and there is reference to how we are managing our waste, but I do think we could perhaps look at putting an additional goal in here for management of waste. So you mentioned roadside waste there, and also the provision of bins. And so I think that is something which there is a bit of a gap here. So thanks very much for that. I think I'll take that back to our waste team and see if they can add something in just to strengthen this section. Thank you, Sandra. Leanne, please.
All right, yeah, again, I mean, I'm in a very high volume tourist area with a massive influx of motorhomes and camper vans. Woo, yeah, we all love them. So the issue really for us is I go out a lot with the camera. I'm by the riverside, and a lot of the lay-bys, the pull-in areas, the amount of human waste that's just left, or people I've seen emptying their sort of caravan toilet cassettes. So is there any kind of, obviously that's polluting the waterways, etc., etc. So some infrastructure to deal with that would be very, very helpful as well. So where people can collect fresh water, dispose of their chemical waste without just dumping it by the side of the road, which normally then when it rains runs into rivers and burns.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a frustrating thing. So I've done a lot of work on the North Coast and you know, talking to people about things like the North Coast 500 and the impact that it's had on a range of facilities, including toilets and bins. And you know, the Highland Council is quite stretched, and having a rapid increase in tourism, the NC 500 is relatively new. At the same time of having budget constraints, it does lead to sort of an almost inevitable mismatch in the provision that can be given. In terms of the caravans and the way that they dispose of their waste, so both the toilets but also other waste that tourists are bringing into the areas, it does remain their responsibility, and a lot of them are choosing not to use the caravan sites because there is a charge associated, and they're parking on the roadside instead, which is possibly why they're disposing of their waste in that way. So the Highland Council can maybe, you know, work with partners, work with the caravan sites to try and help encourage people to use those, but it is a huge challenge to stop people just parking on the roads instead.
I think, unfortunately, they're just not going to use the campsites because they want to do this wild camping, as they term it. So, but charging someone £5 where there's a public toilet, say near me is in Morriston car park, and there was a public toilet that no longer works, which again adds to the problem. But charging someone £5 or £10 to dispose of waste, that would probably, they would pay it, but they're not going to spend £40 on a campsite. They're still going to pay, they're still going to park in the lay-by regardless. Every lay-by around here is full of motorhomes and camper vans. So I don't think encouraging them is going to work. You have to give an alternative as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I've not heard the idea of just being able to pay to go into a caravan site to dispose of your waste and then, you know, not staying there, driving back out. I'm not sure if that's something which can be done at any of the caravan sites at the moment.
I don't think so. No. I think where you have, say, a public toilet, I know the Drocket car park has got public toilets. If there could be a separate or a waste area in places like where there's car parks and public toilets. So don't put it on a campsite. It could be an infrastructure that sits with the public toilet infrastructure that we don't have enough of.
It's a really good idea. I'm just writing that down. We do have a team within the Highland Council who look at tourism and visitor management, but we also work closely with Visit Scotland as well. So that might be something to talk to them about. But I really like the idea. So paying to maybe use an area not within a campsite to dispose of caravan waste. Yeah, so it might work well in a car park. Yeah, okay. Thanks very much for that, Leanne. Can we go to Russell next, please?
Yeah, thanks. On 3.1, where you say support the net zero strategy, I think it might be useful to kind of elaborate on that a bit more with some examples. And certainly an example from our area in Kilmally is kind of pollution associated with road travel. And, you know, we've just had drastic cuts to our bus services, and which are run under contract by Highland Council. And I think if the impacts of that could be linked up with the ecology strategy as well, it would help kind of with joined up thinking that, you know, buses aren't just for allowing people to get around, they're taking traffic off the roads and reducing pollution as well. And so, you know, both active travel and public transport could kind of be included as examples here of action where within Highland Council this can be joined up with the ecology strategy.
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I don't think we mentioned road runoff in the pollution section, which we should. So not just chemical runoff, but also rubber and other car-related runoff, and also litter, which is road runoff as well. So that's not something we mentioned in this section, but we could. And I agree that this would be a good 3.1 would be a good action to include some specific examples. And we could also link for the digital version, we could link directly to the net zero strategy as well. So you could go to the section that we're referencing. So yeah, I think that's a really good point. Thanks very much, Russell. Can we go to Jenny next, please?
Thank you. It was just I think I'm in the dark now because I'm in my shed. It was just a quick comment with regards to campervan waste. There's a site in Ochtertyre that hosts campervans, but also offers just a service to empty the waste. That's really, really popular. So I thought I'd just throw that in.
Oh, could you write the name of it into the chat function, because I might have a look at that and then get in touch with the visitor team and see if they can have a look and see if that's something that could be provided elsewhere, because if it's being used regularly and they're able to charge for it, that's maybe something that we can sort of tell partners about. So thanks very much for that, Jenny. That's really useful.
No bother.
Okay, can we go to Ian Miller next, please? Sorry, Ian, we can't hear you at the moment. If you could just take yourself off mute, please.
The campervan site in Golspie offers a facility.
The Golspie does that as well?
Yes.
So you can just go in and use that without actually staying?
I think it's £5.
Right,
but people have been known to climb over the fence to get rid of their stuff.
Right, well, that's not ideal.
No.
No. But yes, thanks for letting us know, because then that's another example that we could use. Hopefully that's something that could spread to other areas. So Kevin and Jenny, I think those are old hands. And so I think we can possibly move on to the next section, unless there are any Last comments on the pollution section. Okay, in that case, we're going to move on to the next section. Okay, so we're now looking at goal 4, which is a combination of 3 things here: communication, training, and education. So this is communication not just within the council, but how we communicate with the public as well. So one example of this would be if the way that we're managing a particular area has changed, having a sign there just to tell local people what we're doing, perhaps even having a QR code so you can just scan it and see what has changed and why it's changed, maybe some of the benefits that might come from that particular change. We've also got there the Species Champions Initiative. So that is an internal initiative where local members, so local elected councillors, can become champions for a particular species of plant or of animal, and then they take a particular interest in projects which relate to those species. We've also got a section there on training. So the council does offer things such as net zero training to members to make sure that decision makers within the council understand the science around the climate and the ecological emergency, and that helps them to make the kind of decisions which affect these themes. Okay, going to the next page now, looking at education. So the council's schools, they all offer a broad range of classes and projects relating to the environment. But we're also looking to work with schools on projects on the school estate. So having wilder areas of the school estate, which is not just good because it's good for it's sort of, it looks nice and it's good for things like mental health and for exercise, but also it's a great learning resource as well to have a wilder area of a school field, for example. And then we also highlight there the Eco Schools programme. We're going to look now at some of the actions associated with communication, training and education. So I'm just going to go through, we've got a couple of pages, so I'll go through a couple of them and then see if there are questions, and then we'll carry on. So if we start at 4.1, report annually the progress of the ecology strategy to a council committee or committees. So this is something that we have planned on since we first started writing this strategy, that it would be a living document and that we would return to it annually to make sure that we're achieving what we want to achieve, to add new information, to add new goals if it's relevant. National targets can change and that can influence us. International situations can change and that can influence us. So I think it's important that this is something that we come back to regularly. 4.2 is about the Highland Council's website and just maybe giving people access to a bit more information about what the council is doing and how that relates to the to ecology and the ecological emergency. So giving people information about the actions we're taking, and having interactive maps so you can go and directly look at areas that are of interest to you within the Highlands to see what we're doing and why we're doing it. Giving updates on important plans and projects which relate to biodiversity, and also providing those key contacts you need if you want to ask someone a question about a particular theme. So if we just start with those two, does anyone have any questions or comments about 4.1 or 4.2? Russell, please.
Yes, sorry to say I get speak again, but I think under communication, it would be good to sort of recognise that it's a two-way process and have some channels for communities to be able to get in touch with Highland Council about issues affecting the kind of ecology of their area and the environment of their area. It's something that we found very difficult as a community council, is to find the right person to speak to and get a response about these issues. So if there was a specific item on that, I think it would be useful.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. I do appreciate that sometimes the council's web pages are not the easiest to navigate, and if there's a particular question or a person that you want to find, it's not always the easiest, and that is something that we do want to address with this particular section. I do hope the environment pages can be some of the most accessible and the easiest to navigate, and that they can provide a lot more than they currently do. And I think that's a big target of this document. And can we go to Jackie next, please?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree with the previous comment, and I was also just thinking on 4.1 whether it would be possible to also communicate like progress updates to community councils as well, just so that we're kind of in the know of what's been happening and what else we need to be doing to support.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good idea, and I think maybe that could be also something that goes on the web pages for the general public. So it's something that, you know, we do want to have this constant feedback back and forth, to make sure that we're making this document and the actions that we're taking on the ecological emergency as strong as we can. So thanks very much for that, Jackie. Let's go to the next couple of actions then. So if we go down to 4.3. Improve communication, public relations through the appropriate use of press releases and social media posts to promote positive action undertaken by the council. So currently, if we have a successful project, for example, the World Heritage Site that I mentioned earlier on, the Flow Country becoming a World Heritage Site, we'll work through our communications team to release some press releases, which are often picked up by local press, but we've also got social media, so we'll post those things out as well. But I think the aim of the purpose of this particular goal is to have a slightly more systematic approach to this. So, for example, there are events such as World Salt Marsh Day, where we could have a story about salt marsh, which links in with that, and it would reach more people because it's connected to a wider campaign. We did a little bit of that during the single-use plastics when there was some national campaigning. We started talking about what we were doing relating to that. So having a more systematic approach about how we communicate what we're doing, I think could help us to reach a wider audience and get that two-way communication as well. Now to 4.4. So identify opportunities to support and work with a range of partners from across the public, private and third sectors to promote and address the ecological emergency. So I've referenced a few times some of the partnerships that we do have with universities, not just the local university, UHI, but also wider across Scotland and the UK, but also with local and national businesses as well, and working with communities. That's something that we do a lot already, but when we're with sort of increasingly restrained budgets, I think looking for innovative ways to either finance projects or to sort of draw on resources that are nascent and available to us is something that we're going to increasingly have to do. And it's something that I think can strengthen some of the projects that we're working on. We've had quite a few successful community-led projects, and I think that's something that we want to really continue with as it relates to biodiversity and our work on the ecology strategy. And just one more, because I've kind of mentioned 4.5 already, improve signage and on-site information, including QR codes at biodiversity enhancement sites. So do I have any questions on those three there? So from 4.3 to 4.5. If not, we can move on to the next section. So going to 4.6, promote awareness, importance and appreciation of Highland biodiversity to visitors in partnership with HighLife Highland Countryside Rangers. And then going down to the next page, 4.7, so now into the theme of training. Develop and deliver in-house biodiversity awareness training, which will be available to all officers and members. So as I mentioned, we already have something like this available for net zero to make sure that all relevant staff and elected officials are well trained in climate science. But this is something that we also want to make sure is available for the science around biodiversity as well. And then 4.8, deliver training for the council officers and members on the implementation of MPF4 So that was the planning framework, which we've mentioned a few times, biodiversity policies and related local and national guidance. Are there any comments on those few there? So from 4.6 to 4.8. Okay, we can go to the next ones now. So going down to 4.9. Deliver ecology and biodiversity enhancement training for all officers involved with the design and implementation of capital projects, so including new development, refurbishment and maintenance. So, yes, okay, yeah. And then 4.10, investigate rollout of building with nature training across teams, developing and delivering capital projects. So those two are somewhat similar to those which we've mentioned previously. So I think we'll go to the education ones now from 4.11 to 4.13. So 4.11, work closely with Highland primary and secondary schools to identify areas of the school estate which could be enhanced for biodiversity and deliver both learning and wellbeing benefits. 4.12, develop and roll out the Scottish Outdoor Access Code education box to provide education on the responsible access to the countryside. And 4.13, continue to support the education and outreach work of the High Life Highland Countryside Rangers and work with the Rangers to address the ecological emergency. So are there any questions or comments about the education section? Could we start with Gillian, please?
Yeah, just looking at 4.11, I think I don't know how feasible it is, but looking at future estate developments of schools, is there any way that I've worked a lot with like eco schools, and you know the school closes at the end of June, reopens in the middle of August, and a lot of the work that the kids have been doing or the space that they're in has got overgrown or hasn't been valued, hasn't been seen. And hasn't been accessible to anyone. And is there a way of looking to the future of these spaces being available to more than just the school estate, and the benefits being available to more people rather than being lost or undervalued?
So this is, oh, sorry, go on.
Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely. I was about to answer, but I can see that Katie's got her hand up. So my colleague Katie might be able to give you a better answer because this is something she perhaps works on a little bit more than me. So Katie, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And completely get you. It is a massive, massive struggle, and it's not something that us directly as Highland Council are working on at the minute, but there is teams working on learning for sustainability projects, and trying to work together with the community as well as the schools, because they are very, very detached. And so finding that balance where communities can access spaces is something that definitely needs to be kind of worked on. And this isn't a Highland Council project, but it's one that I've helped support through the Nature Restoration Fund that we have available, which is the Flourish charity. They're working with the North Keswick School, primary school, sorry, and working on a project to develop a garden for the school, which is very focused on biodiversity as well as giving food for locals. And they're working really strongly with the community to try and develop that and provide access for the community during those summer months, because as you say, it's just a big challenge. So although it's not Highland Council, it's one I have worked with and been part of that project, and they've got a really good idea that hopefully they're hoping to kind of develop further as well across Scotland.
I think it would be a massive improvement and an amazing goal to achieve, is to these spaces to be available as you say, a connected space, not education and community.
Yeah,
completely separate.
Absolutely.
That would be an amazing thing to achieve, and even trying to get involved in new school estates to try and So when things are being planned, can it be made as a combined space, not just a thing with a 6 foot odd fence round it?
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Gillian, and thanks very much, Katie, for helping me out with that one. Can we go to Ian next, please?
Thank you. This is Golspie Community Council, and there's a local group called Golspie and Bloom who do great work. I'm a member of it, and we get the local schools to help up with hanging baskets, all that sort of thing, and they can see what they've done throughout the summer. They're not involved with the watering and all that sort of thing. They don't get up early enough. So yeah, but we do have the experience of schools, of course, doing things in our community garden. But of course, when the summer holidays come along, it does fall apart a bit. Thank you.
That is maybe a nice example of what you were just talking about, Gillian, of how to widen access to projects which are ongoing during the summer, but maybe have been abandoned and things sort of fall apart a little bit. So I think maybe that's quite a nice example, Golspie and Bloom. So yeah, thanks very much for that, Ian. Okay, so there's a few. So I think Jenny, you're next. Jenny Munro, please.
Thank you. Again, I'm not sure if I'm saying this in the right bit. It's more health than education, but are you linked in with the Highland NHS Mental Health Delivery Group, Green Health subgroup?
I believe so. I think Katie is possibly linked in with that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I was just thinking about the work they do seems to parallel a lot of this strategy. It'd be a good link to have.
Absolutely. I think the theme of mental health and the impact that having access to nature has on mental and physical health is something that we're increasingly aware of now. And we are looking at the ways in which we can use our nature restoration or adding more natural spaces to help give people, particularly in more urban areas, access to some more green space. So thanks very much for that, Jenny. Leanne, please.
It was just an example of kind of children's education and working with them is the Glengarry Community Woodlands. They do absolutely fantastic work. They have like summer school camps, so during the holidays, and they do everything from wild foraging to building dens, and just making fantastic memories and really connecting with nature. Log identification, plant identification as well. So just as an example of where it's working really well is the Glengarry Community Woodlands.
That's really great. Thanks very much. I think it's so often you can be living quite near to something which you'd love to get involved with and you just don't know it exists. And so I think it's always worth mentioning those. And it's the kind of thing I think maybe the council could help to direct people to. That might be a good link between community councils and this group that's managing the ecology strategy, is helping to highlight some of the projects that people can get involved with in their local area that they might never have heard of before. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Leanne. Can we go to Jackie next, please?
Hey, yeah. So I'm not sure whether this sits within the remit of Highland Council, but I just had a thought that I haven't seen reference to much around like community gardens, community allotments for like growing veg and stuff like that, which is obviously good for the birds and the bees, but also good for people growing their own food, being less reliant on bringing it in, etc. So just wondering whether that would be something that could sit in this document or whether that's owned elsewhere.
We do have a food growing officer. Unfortunately, she's not here today, but that is something that the Highland Council does have a role in. So not for all allotments, but there are some allotments, and yes, for a couple of community gardens, and there's a couple of community growing projects as well. I think it's mentioned in the Space for Nature section. We really whistled through that towards the end of the first hour, so we possibly just breezed over it a little bit too quickly, but that should be up in the Making Space for Nature section. So thanks very much. Thanks, Jackie. Can we go to... Oh, Andy's got his hand up. Andy, do you want to add something to that?
Oh, well, you kind of just said it there, actually, Joe. It's in it's in the Making Space for Nature section. There's 3 actions around community food growing. One is about supporting a biodiversity, wildlife friendly approach to food growing. There's one on collaborating with the Highland Good Food Partnership to direct Highland residents to information and support regarding biodiversity friendly food growing, and then also the promoting the establishment of fruit trees, fruit forests and orchards within food growing areas and within local communities. So hopefully that's kind of covered off some of the main areas around community food growing and ensuring that or finding ways of making that as biodiversity friendly as possible as well. So reducing the amount of use of pesticides where fruit trees and fruit bushes are growing, that they're not all necessarily netted as well. So there's still access for wildlife to some of those.
Thanks very much, Andy. Saved me from fumbling trying to race back up and find those specific actions while everyone's watching the screen. So that was really helpful. And thanks also for the question, Jackie. Can we go to Cecilia? Oh no, sorry, I've jumped Ian. So I apologise, Cecilia. If we could come to you in a moment. Ian's next, please.
Yes, we look after an area of the Big Barn in Golspie. I don't know if you know it. Yep. But it's a beautiful scenic area, and we've used community payback to do some work in that area, which is beneficial to the people who have offended. Okay.
All right, thank you very much for that. I do know the Big Burn. It's a beautiful walk or a run up by the waterfall. You can get all the way.
Well, every Tuesday we go up and cut rhododendrons.
Ah, right. So, oh, that's yes. Well, it's a beautiful place to go and do it.
Which aren't all invasive, by the way. The ones that we're cutting are invasive, but some of the ones in the garden that you get are not invasive. So, okay.
Oh, well,
thank you.
That's good work. So it's much appreciated. And thanks very much, Ian. Cecilia, now, please.
Hello. It was nice to hear our community woodlands into the woods thing being mentioned by somebody else who's not from the area. Just also to say that we in the community woodlands also have a gardening team. We've got public gardens there, but of course none of this is owned by the council. I mean, the Highland Council. It's owned by GCW, and I think one should make that clear that it is essentially a private arrangement. Mm-hmm. Not a Highland Council matter.
Yes, absolutely. It's maybe something that we can raise awareness of, but yes, we don't have direct control over or any management of. So thanks very much for that, Cecilia. Okay, so that takes us to the end of that section, which was looking at communication, training and education. So we're now going to move on to the data management section. So it's a shorter section, and then after that, we're going to go to sort of a wrapping up, and we'll take some overall general comments of the 5 themes that we're looking at. Are these the right themes? Do we need more? Do we need fewer? What do you think of the design of the document? So those are the things we'll talk about at the end, but we've got one more section first, which is on data management. So the volume of data that the Highland Council and other public bodies and other organisations involved in biodiversity monitoring or management of the environment, the amount of data is increasing all the time, not just in volume, but also in variety. So there are some projects which are ongoing or taking a bit of time to get going. The Better Biological Data Project is one example of this, which will help us to manage our data and to use it more effectively when we're looking to sort of improve the natural environment. There's also quite an exciting one, the Landscape Scale Natural Capital Tool for Scotland. So this is a meeting I was at just this morning, which is a toolkit which uses GIS mapping to allow decision makers such as the Highland Council to look at how they can sort of get the best bang for their buck when they're investing in nature restoration, to try and connect up patches of habitat with these sort of stepping stone sections to allow plants and animals to move more naturally, but also to give people access to the kind of ecosystem services like flood protection and cleaner air that we all want from the natural environment. So just a few actions here on data management, and we'll take any questions on these. I'll go through them all in one go just because there's only 3. So 5.1, continue to support the Highland Biological Recording Group and other local recording groups. So these are existing efforts by groups of, I believe, volunteers who are giving up a lot of their own time to compile a lot of the data that we're using for our decision making at the moment. 5.2, support with partners and contribute to the development of the Northwest Biological Data Hub as part of the Better Biological Data project. So this is a big partnership project which I've not been personally involved with, but I think a couple of my colleagues might know a little bit more about. And it's just going to allow us to use this data more effectively when we're making decisions about how we invest in ecosystem restoration, or when we're sort of creating new habitat. And then 5.3, to promote citizen science projects operating across the Highlands. So this is trying to get people involved more closely in gathering some of the data which we can then use for our projects. So does anyone have any comments or questions about data management? Kristen, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Kristen, we can't hear you at the moment. You just need to take yourself off mute, please.
How's that? Can you hear me now?
That's much better, yes, yes.
Hello there, it's Kristen Duncan from Nairn West and Suburban Community Council. And I think I've maybe missed the best place to raise this. It could be communications and education, and it could be coastal. It's the matter of herring gulls. And I thought maybe data was the place to put it, but possibly not. But I'll try and be brief. As you're probably aware, gulls are causing a nuisance during the breeding season, and you'll see this all around the Inner Moray Firth, but I'm sure also places like Fort William and anywhere where there's a decent population of humans, there can be a problem with herring gulls. So in Nairn, it's the business community in particular that, and it's the food outlets, they're very concerned about the numbers and the aggressive behaviour of herring gulls, and they say the numbers are too high. But the facts from Nature Scotart is that the population is actually on decline across its range. So from our perspective as a community council, we're often asked to help make a case for better or quicker granting of licenses to control these species. As you can imagine, that's quite a difficult and potentially quite a divisive issue. And gulls can be aggressive and a nuisance, but equally, people's habits often encourage this behaviour in many of our coastal towns. So perhaps it's better education of humans on restraining feeding the birds, and better adherence to litter and keeping the streets clean, and also better deterrence of keeping the birds off the nesting sites. There's lots of things you can do without resorting to a licence to kill them. So data is important. I think quite a few of the community councils around the Moray Firth are asking about and querying what the surveys are saying about the numbers, and that's not really the answer. But it is still important about having good information on the data. But I think what the point I'd like to make, and for you to take away, Joe, is to think about where we might actually raise this. It's to do with education, communications, and survey and data. It's all of these, and maybe this one sits more with the coastal bit further up the document. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments there. And yes, I grew up on the south coast of England, and I'm quite familiar with quite aggressive gulls, especially if you're at a big school on the south coast where everyone's lunchboxes are sort of open during lunchtime. So I do know this experience, and I know that some people are really do get bothered by them, and that they can be quite aggressive. It was I was aware that the data suggests that they are becoming a threatened species, and I know that there are certain rooftops within the Highland area which are designated as gull roofs. I think the Nature Scot headquarters is actually designated as a nesting place for birds. So yes, I agree that I would hope the answer would be, rather than controlling them, trying to dissuade them from certain areas and maybe educating people. You do often see signs now, please don't feed the gulls, because of course that does encourage that kind of aggressive behaviour. So maybe that's something where the Highland Council can help with those that kind of information. but I'm not sure about permissions for gull control. It's not something I've come across before within the council, and that might be something that's out with the council's control. That might be more something to do with Nature Scott, but I'm not sure. I don't know if any of my colleagues know who to talk to if it comes to gull control. Do any of my colleagues in the room know the answer to that one for Kristen?
Licensing for the destruction of gull chicks or gull eggs rests with Nature Scott. I would suggest that's a very much last resort solution, and certainly Nature Scott would consider it a last resort as well. And they don't issue that many licenses for the destruction of eggs or chicks. Like you say, Joe, the herring gull is a red listed species. It is in serious decline, and and they come to areas, coastal areas, where people congregate because of the behaviour of people, for the most part, and because they have, there's easy availability of food, and and very often we as people, we move into their territory, and so we come into conflict with the herring gull. And so it's a very delicate issue, I think, and how we resolve that is not straightforward by any means. And I absolutely agree, it's about education. And I think if we can find ways to educate people how to dispose of rubbish, we can ensure our bins are not accessible to gulls as well, because many of our bins can be accessed by gulls, but you can get bins which are not. They have special flaps on them to stop the gulls getting in, and finding a way of actually sort of coexisting with the gulls is the long-term solution. One of the things we have looked at is finding other ways of providing safe havens for gulls. So, for example, on industrial buildings, and allow them to nest on those buildings, but perhaps dissuading them from high streets or from areas where there are food outlets and other places where perhaps we don't want to see them quite as much as we currently do, but make sure they have safe places where they can go and they can nest and they can raise their young. And the species can hopefully turn itself around, because it's not one we want to see lost.
Thanks very much for that, Andy, and thanks, Kristen, for the question. Could we go to Jackie now, please?
Yeah, just on 5.3 and action similar to that, I just thought that's an example of something that I'm assuming is what everyday people can be doing in terms of citizen science projects. So kind of comes to communication, but how community councils can be made more aware of these types of activities that we should then be encouraging people in our communities or putting in our meeting notes, so that people in our communities can kind of see that these projects are in existence if they want to get involved in them.
Thanks very much, and thanks so much for the offer just to help raise awareness of these things when they do come up. Thanks, Jackie. And I wonder if, Cecilia, if that was the same kind of comment that came from you, because your hand went down as Jackie was speaking. So, oh no, the separate comment. Okay. So we're now at the end of the document. I'll just show, because we're going to talk a little bit about the design now. I'll just show you the last couple of pages there. So what we want to come to now are some more general comments about the whole document. So what we want to talk about is the design of the document, but also the overall feel of it. Is it accessible enough? How did you feel about the language when you were going through it? Was it technical enough? Was it too technical? What do you think about the images that we're using, the color scheme? So any comments on the design are also really welcome. And if we think about those 5 themes again, I'll maybe scroll back up just so we can see all the 5 themes on one page. It's near the top. Do we have the right 5 themes? Would you have more? Would you have fewer? If you'd have more, what's missing? If you'd have fewer, which do you think are maybe not so important? So I'll just get back up to that. 5 themes here. So leadership, space for nature, pollution, communication, training and education, all as one theme, and then data. So Cecilia, do you want to start?
I think the themes are good. And in general, I think it's well written, although I think some jargon could have been avoided, and also some of the more purple patches. But what I really want to comment on is how incredibly hard it is to read. I have extremely bad eyesight. I manage, but anything that is printed in grey on white is hopeless, and anything which has writing on coloured background is also hopeless. I would advise you in the future to get in touch with the Royal National Institution for the Blind, because they have extremely sensible guidelines for how this sort of thing should be laid out. It's very pretty, but it's really hard to read. I managed it, but I preferred not to have had to work so hard. Thanks.
So would it be helpful to have a copy that was just in black and white, so there wasn't any writing on coloured sections?
Ça m'est égal. It doesn't really matter. The problem about it is that it's just very off-putting, and also if you're wanting to start preparing ones that are different, then you've got to consider the resources that are involved. Why not just have something that anybody can read right from the beginning? But I know it's none of my business really, but I just thought I'd like to make that comment.
No, it's a very welcome comment. Thank you very much, Cecilia. Jackie next, please.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of things just on the structure of the document, I guess, and readability. So I've got kind of 2 points. I think the first one is that in the exec summary, I think it could more clearly articulate what those 5 actions are and some of the key priorities in terms of the action items from each of them. It felt like more of a generic talk. I didn't feel like I could understand kind of the key points from each of the 5 actions within the exec summary. So maybe just taking another look at how that's really clearly articulated.
Yeah, so to introduce those a bit more clearly. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for that, Jackie. Could we go to Russell next, please?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Jackie. I think your internet stopped there for a moment, so I lost you for a bit.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me again?
Yes, it's okay now. Yep.
Oh, sorry. I just had one other comment. Sorry. That end to end in the document is a lot required to get lost. Just trying to make it a bit more concise, and then in the actual sections, being a little bit more structured. In terms of, you could start with, why is this important? Then move on to what are we already doing, and then what are our priorities in the actions? Because right now, when I was reading, I kind of lost it quite a lot of times because it jumps around to a lot of different points. So just in terms of keeping it really.
Okay, thanks for that, Jackie.
And then my last point, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Again, it was cutting in and out a little bit, but I think I got the impression of what you were saying there is that it might be helpful just to make it a little bit more readable. So for each section, saying why is this important, and then taking us through a little bit more logically in each section about what the actions are and why we're having those and how they relate to the themes. So I think that's the point that you were making. But if that's wrong, please correct me in the comment section. Yep. Thanks very much, Jackie.
Thank you.
Could we go to Russell next, please?
Yeah, I think one theme that might be really useful, particularly from a community council perspective, because we're so involved in planning, would be to kind of draw a lot of the planning issues into a section on its own. We've talked quite a lot about NPF4, and that comes in at various places in the document. But if we had a section on the kind of ecological strategy and how that affects planning decisions, that would certainly be really useful for us when we're trying to respond to planning applications.
Thanks. I think that's a really good suggestion. And planning is such a big part of how we have an impact on the environment. And so I think that would be that could stand as its own section. So I've made a note of that, and we've got Karen in the room here, but we've got other colleagues we work with from planning as well. That's something we can have a chat about. I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Russell. Could we go to Ian next, please?
Sorry about this. It's nothing to do with this. It's just to go back over something, please. And that is that there's more roundabouts than just down in Inverness. And when you're doing wildflower meadow stuff, there is the Dornoch roundabout, and there is the one just before Inverness on the dual carriageway.
Yep, absolutely.
Also, when I was coming up the road tonight, I witnessed a spraying by Bayet on the A9. So that's not good. The main reason for attending this meeting really was to express how I feel about the lack of insects. You know, once you've done a night drive and you look at your number plate, there's nothing on it. So spraying the roads is not a good idea, I don't think.
Yes, absolutely. The decline in insect numbers is really worrying.
Terrifying.
Yes, the council has significantly reduced its use of pesticides, and I think that's something that is now going to be commonplace across not just the Highland region, but the whole of the UK and you know, large parts of Europe and much of the world are really rolling back on a lot of chemical use. Of course, it's still used a lot in the fields in agriculture, and it's something that we maybe play a role in, but you know, as a regional leader and sort of working with partners on trying to reduce chemical use more broadly. But I absolutely agree that it is incredibly worrying how insect numbers have dropped. Yeah.
This is Transport Scotland through Bayer, so it's nothing to do with Highland Council.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I think we've got time for one more. So Gillian, please.
Thank you. There was a couple of things. The 2.5A, the talk of the 10 biodiversity enhancement projects, and what it says at the side there is subject to funding. I'm just wondering if it would probably be another chunk of work, but if we're going to have this as a document that allows communities to work towards projects as well, is there a way of linking projects and funding opportunities? So I mean, funding is massive, money is massive, it's highly restricted now, but you know, is there could we join that somehow?
Do you know what? There's a lot of times where we look at funding opportunities and we'll see things which are meant to be community led. So the Highland Council itself cannot be the lead on a particular project, but we can partner with communities, and then we sort of talk to each other and we say, you know, do you know anyone who could use this money? And so perhaps it would be useful to have a good chain of communication to the community councils where we ask all the community councils, do you know a group who could maybe use this money? We've found this funding opportunity. We can maybe help a little bit, but we're not allowed to claim it for ourselves. So I think that would be a really good use of time. So yes, I think that's a really good point, Gillian.
Thank you. And the other one was, I was just wondering when the weed control strategy was going to be coming online. Is it imminent or?
I don't know the date of that. Do any of my colleagues know the date for that strategy? So weed control. Does anyone know the date for that?
I don't know the date, but it is being drafted now. It's not our particular service. It's services in the it's colleagues in amenity services who are leading on that. But I would certainly expect it to probably be finished or near finished or out to consultation within the next 6 months. Although don't hold me to that.
Right, I shan't. Thank you. And just a message from somebody in our community council in Beloch to congratulate you on achieving this and heading into it. Thank you.
Oh, that's very kind. Thanks very much. And Gillian, I can't see your surname, so I can't email you directly if I go away and look up the date for the for that strategy. But if you email me, then I can get back to you. I can go and find out the answer for the weed control.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're at the end of our 2 hours now. So I want to say a huge thank you for everyone who's come along and listened and contributed. It's just fantastic to have your help with this document. It's our first ecology strategy, and it's going to be a living document. As we mentioned, we want to keep making it stronger every year. If you do know people within your communities who you think might be able to add something, do send the link to the consultation to them and do encourage them to add their thoughts as well. So my email was in the chat part of Teams here, but it was also on the invitation that you received to join this meeting. So do get in touch with me if you have any further questions or comments about the ecology strategy. I'll put my email in the in the chat again just now, just so it's at the bottom. But thank you all very much. I'll stop the recording now, and yes, have a lovely rest of your evening. So thank you very much. Okay, bye for now, everyone.
Bye. Thanks.